Good evening and welcome to UNISON Scotland's Council elections Hustings taking place this evening, and I welcome all our members across Scotland this evening to this event. The format of the event will be that each party, each representative will have 5 minutes to do opening statements, and then we'll have questions from our members from across Scotland, and I will put those questions to the panel. We did draw lots prior to the meeting tonight, and I'll bring them in the order that those lots were drawn. Just before I do that, I just want to say a huge thank you to our members and local government workers across Scotland for the phenomenal response you've had during the pandemic, delivering community services in what is unprecedented and some of the most difficult and challenging times for you personally, and in delivering those services. And I also want to say that I know from the members as the Chair of Local Government for Scotland and speaking to thousands of workers across Scotland that we don't feel that that recognition has been properly given, or there's been proper recognition for local government and the services that we've provided and the work that we've done. Where other areas have been rewarded financially, we haven't had. I want to also just say that, you know, we're going through some very difficult times, and our members, this is the panel members, to say that our members are suffering. You know, the cost of living is increasing. We have fairly low wages. 55% of our workers earn below £25,000 in local government. And, you know, they've been thousands across Scotland have been forced to work at home, and there's been no recompense for that at all. And we blame all parts of government for that lack of recognition. And even the £6 per week that we called for to help support people working from home didn't happen either. So we understand that times are difficult. We understand the crisis of local government funding, but we do call on all areas of government to respond for our members here in Scotland. And I just want to finish that, you know, we are in local government terms in Scotland very concerned about the future of local government and what might come in the National Care Service and what might happen to our community services. So it is a very worrying time for our members, and I think that these elections, these local elections, will be absolutely critical and crucial in terms of the candidates and the questions that we'll be raising. I'll just say that we've delivered to every branch in Scotland in Unison today was 10-foot pledge cards that we'll be inviting all our candidates to come in and sign around respect, reward and recognise. And I'm sure that we can all sign up to that, because it's undoubted that the response to this pandemic has highlighted the essential requirement for local government services. So I want to thank you for the introduction, but I want to thank my fellow members and workers and colleagues for the work that you've done. We understand that, we've seen it, and we rose to the challenge, and I think undoubtedly we saved many thousands of lives in doing so. So I'm going to call I'll just introduce the panel first of all, and then I'll call them in the order that we're going to ask them to speak in. So the first candidate I'd like to introduce is the Conservative Party, Councillor Neil Benny. The Labour Party, representing the Labour Party, Councillor David Ross. Representing the Liberal Democrat Party is Willie Rennie, MSP. The Green Party, with Councillor Chaz Booth. And for the Scottish Nationalist Party, we have the National Campaign Director, Councillor Kelly Parry. I'd like to welcome you all, and I'd like to ask, first of all, kicking us off tonight, is the Green Party, Councillor Chaz Booth. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much to Unison for hosting tonight's hustings. My name is Chaz Booth. I'm the Green Councillor for Leith on the City of Edinburgh Council. I'm coming up to the end of my second term as a councillor, so I will have served 10 years. Can I start by apologising for the fact that you don't have a woman Green Councillor in front of you? I'm aware that Unison's membership is overwhelmingly female. And as Greens, we work really hard to try and increase the representation of women amongst Green councillors. Overwhelmingly, those in town halls are male, pale and stale, and we need to change that. So Greens are really keen to see more women elected and more diversity as well, both in the BME community, amongst people who have a disability and so on. And we have mechanisms in place to try and ensure that we do have a balanced set of candidates who are likely to be elected. But unfortunately, none of my women colleagues were available at this short notice, so you've got me instead. The theme of the Greens election going into these local elections is think global, act local. As Greens, we want to empower local government. We look to many other countries around Europe where they have a far stronger local government setup. Norway, for example, where there are several different layers of local government, and there really is a sort of bottom-up power structure there. We think that Scotland should do well to look to some of our European neighbours. These next 5 years will be absolutely crucial, both for democracy and for our planet. Our theme is think global, act local. And obviously, it's absolutely crucial that we get a grip on climate change. And local authorities are absolutely essential in the delivery of how we will tackle climate change. But they're also crucial for local government as well. We need to see a replacement for the unfair and the outdated council tax. And I'm glad that there is now a mechanism as part of the cooperation agreement between the Greens and the SNP. There is a mechanism that will set up the Citizens' Assembly to find a replacement for the unfair and outdated council tax. Electing Green councillors will help to empower local communities and also to empower local government as well. And we want to work with the trade unions to ensure that we do empower local government. We have a strong track record in Edinburgh, where my councillor colleague Melanie Main has been on the JCG, working hard with unions such as UNISON, but the other trade unions as well that represent local government workers. And as Greens, we have a strong track record of delivery for the planet and for democracy as well. We're particularly proud that we influenced the SNP government to introduce free bus travel for all under 22s. And that's something that we're starting to see the benefits of now. Can I end, though, by just recognising what Mark said at the start, that through the pandemic, local government workers have been working extremely hard, and they haven't necessarily seen the recognition. And that recognition needs to come in terms of pay and conditions. It doesn't need to come just in terms of applause from the doorstep. And that's why Greens are really working hard to try and ensure that we do protect funding for local government and that we empower local government from the bottom up. So with that, and with our phrase for this local authority election of think global and act local, please do consider voting for the Greens in the local authority elections. And I obviously look forward to the questions that your members have to put this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chasbooth. And I'd like to call now on the Conservative Party candidate, Councillor Neil Benny, representing the Conservatives.
Thanks, Chair. My name's Neil Benny. I'm the councillor for Stirling West on Stirling Council. It's a funny one, this. It's a strange thing to have a national hustings for a local government election, but I can entirely understand why organisations like UNISON want to hear from the political parties about their approach to local government, because, I mean, today we launched our manifesto in Stirling online. It contains things like reversing our authority's cuts to waste collection, which have reduced the frequency of collection from every 4 weeks to every 2 weeks, investing in our staff to ensure they have the right training and leadership for them to make the best contribution to serving the public. And I think we've got great, exciting ideas about the regeneration of Stirling city centre and transport plans to service our rural areas. But of course, for people beyond Stirling, this doesn't really have a huge amount of resonance. These are our local priorities. Our ideas suit Stirling, I think, and Conservative council groups and administrations in other parts of Scotland will have different ideas and approaches. And that's the great thing about local democracy. It's about suiting the needs of the local community. Differences to be celebrated. We're stronger in our diversity, and it is one of the reasons why I enjoy being a local councillor so much. I've been a councillor for, it's 15 years now coming up, and that's a terrifying thought as much as anything else. But the Scottish Conservatives stand up for local services. We stand up for local control of services, and we stand up for a fair funding model for local councils. These ideas are ideas that unite Conservatives across Scotland. The SNP government in Edinburgh has cut local government funding. We receive a smaller share of the available money, and this is regrettable. The funding settlement from the UK is at its highest level ever, and yet local government funding continues to be squeezed. You can't talk about empowering local communities or respecting local democracy or respecting council workers while starving local government of the resources that we need to pay for those services, because people deliver those services. we also can't keep asking people to pay more through an increasingly discredited council tax system. Everyone seems to agree that it's a bad system, but despite 14 years of promising to do something about it, the SNP has never grasped the nettle on this. Local councils should be the beating heart of our country. They should be dynamic places delivering services designed around local needs. They should be adaptable and fast-paced places where resources can be moved quickly to fulfil local needs. We see what happens when you let local government off the leash. At the beginning of COVID, brave frontline workers and a considerable number of redeployed people from services that couldn't be delivered because of the pandemic swung into action. They identified the most needy, they ensured they got the help they need, they got moving with track and trace, which wouldn't have been possible without the huge knowledge which exists in the local government workforce. Local government could do this because those local council workers, those staff in our who know their communities, know their people. If you place trust in local government, you can fund it and you empower it and you let it get on with things, we can achieve so much. Centralisation, whether it be through the National Care Service, which I'm sure we'll discuss, or via central government intervention and guidance in almost every sphere of council operation, is not welcome, it's not effective. If you elect Conservative candidates at this election, you will get local champions who will look at every individual circumstance. Conservatives are pragmatists in local government, but we believe in local government. In all of its messy and sometimes terrifying diversity, we should embrace that difference. And I'm looking forward to the conversation and the questions tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Benny, and keeping within time, which we're doing really well so far. Can I now ask the Labour Party candidate, Councillor David Ross, to address the Hustings. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark, and good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor David Ross. I'm co-leader of Fife Council and leader of the Labour group on the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. And when we look at this election, it really is a watershed election. On the one hand, we're emerging from the pandemic. Changes to the way we work and the pressures on families with the growing cost of living crisis mean that things won't just go back to how they were before the pandemic. And we have all seen firsthand the massive contribution that local government workers made to keep services going and to support communities during the pandemic. And it may not feel like it, but it was very much appreciated. And we all want to have the resources to actually reward that in the proper way, but unfortunately that isn't the position we're in local government. But going forward, local government does have a crucial role to play in supporting the recovery of our local economies, our services and our communities, and in supporting the many families and individuals facing poverty as a result of the pandemic and the cost of living increases. And on the other hand, we face continuing cuts to core funding for local services, centralisation and ring fencing by the SNP government that, and it's no exaggeration, threatens to destroy many of these vital local services and destroy local government as we know it at the moment. So the choice at this election is between electing Labour councillors and councils that will stand up to the attacks from the SNP government and fight to protect local services and protect jobs, or SNP councillors who, quite frankly, too often will blindly follow the orders of their masters in Holyrood, or the Tories who at root are quite happy to cut and privatise local services. And the crisis in funding for local services predates the pandemic by many years. Scottish Government controls over 80% of local government funding. And since 2013-14, core council funding for services has been cut by 20% in real terms. And that's a massive amount when you think about it. It's had a huge impact on local services. And the core grant for the coming year gives nothing for inflation, nothing for pay, nothing to take account of demographic pressures that all local authorities are going to have to deal with. There's a black hole of £251 million in council funding across Scotland. And that impacts very much on pay and the jobs of our workers. So without fair funding from Scottish Government, the only way that councils can make the payoffs our workers deserve is to cut more services and to cut jobs. And it's in the interest of local government workers, trade unions and councils to stand together against these attacks on local services. And it's Labour councillors who will be at the forefront of that fight. So we need fair funding for local services so we can stop the cuts to services, provide decent pay rises to the workers that provide these services. We need an end to ring fencing. We need an end to centralisation and the undermining of local democratic accountability and control of services. And only local government can effectively shape services to meet local needs and circumstances. We need investment in social care and decent paying conditions for carers. We need investment in housing. We need investment in roads and transport. We need investment in sport, leisure, community facilities and activities, in our parks and green spaces, in schools and education, in skills and training, and in our local economies and town centres. Investment to help address the challenge of climate change at a local level. And the list goes on, it's endless. And you can't pick out one priority above another. It's a result of over a decade of starving local authorities and local services of funding. And I would argue that only local Labour councillors and councils can be trusted to stand up to the SNP government and argue for the resources to deliver these priorities and protect the vital jobs and services our communities rely on. And if we value our local services, value our workforce, value local democratic control and accountability, then we need to elect Labour councillors and Labour councils. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ross. I would now like to invite the representative of the Liberal Democrat Party, Willie Rennie, MSP, to address the hustings. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I know it probably sounds a platitude, but I think your comments at the beginning to thanking all the workers was really important. And I think we are probably all united on this panel about our appreciation for what was done, because, you know, there was lots of clapping for the NHS, and quite rightly so, but there was many, many others who were out there day in, day out, providing, you know, essential services that kept the world ticking along. And so many of them were local government workers. And, you know, we will be judged by our actions, not just our words and our applause. And that's where you're right to hold us to account this evening. But I just want to set out 4 areas for what will be priorities for the Liberal Democrats in this election campaign. One is about stronger communities, better mental health, closing the poverty-related attainment gap in education, which I think is important for us all, but also social care and the plans, which I think will probably dominate the next few years, the plans to centralise care services and put it under the control of ministers in Edinburgh. Stronger communities. We have for years seen greater responsibilities loaded onto local government, and the funds to deliver those services haven't followed it. And the result is that core services, essential services still, are being cut by local councils. And it's got to end, because it's the same old game every single time. I hear ministers stand up and they say, but we're increasing the funding, but the responsibilities increase even more. So that's got to come to an end, and we've got to have the ability for local government to be able to raise the majority of the money that it spends so that it can fund its services properly and get a fair deal too from its central government. You can't keep on cutting, in effect, all the core services that we rely upon, because they are essential services. Secondly is mental health. Workers are burnt out. The ones I speak to really put a shift in through the pandemic, and they are now utterly exhausted, and they are feeling the effects on their mental health. So we do need to improve the mental health services, and that's why we want mental first aiders in every part of local government, so they're there to catch the signs at an early stage to support workers. But we also need to improve access through GPs with professionals within the GP services, so that those workers can get the services that they need as quickly as possible. We've also got plans for putting mental health professionals alongside the police, so that council workers aren't picking up where mental health services should be dealing with the support that you're finding in terms of housing services and like, where it is often happening. Third is closing the poverty-related attainment gap. It's been a sizable gap for far too long, and that's having an effect on our children's life chances. We do need to increase the pupil equity fund to help close that gap, to support schools, to make sure they've got the right funds to help pupils. But we also need to make sure that we've got an expansion of nursery education, because I think that's one of the best investments we can make in terms of changing a young person's life chances. And then the final thing is on social care. I think we're the only party that's opposed to the nationalisation, the centralisation of the social care service. I don't think it's going to change very much at all. We saw with the centralisation of the police that it was a distraction, an expensive distraction. What I would rather do is invest that money in improving the pay and conditions of workers. Because there's a reason why we've got a shortage of staff, is because they're just not paid enough in the social care sector. I meet people every day who are struggling to get care packages to be let out of hospital because there's a shortage of care workers. And that's what we need to change. Rather than fiddling around with the administration, we need to make sure it's properly funded to make sure we can have enough workers to provide the service we need. And then finally, an extra point. For those who've got Liberal Democrat councillors, you know that we pride ourselves in providing a good local service, getting things done at a local level and reporting back on a regular basis. We pride ourselves in that local service and action. So I would urge you to look at your Liberal Democrat candidate, and there's more than there has been for some time in this election campaign. Consider them, vote for them if you want a good, hard-working local councillor, as well as all these things that I've laid out this evening. Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now call on the Scottish Nationalist Party representative, Councillor Kelly Parry, who is the National Campaign Director. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Mark. My name's Kelly Parry. I'm a councillor in Midlothian for the Scottish National Party, and I'm really glad to be here tonight. So thank you very much for putting on this Hustings event. And I guess I want to start by recognising and respecting local government workers and the part that they played during the pandemic. Local government workers were at the absolute forefront of dealing head on with the pandemic, particularly at a time when we didn't really know what we were dealing with, and they just went out there and they done it, often working extraordinarily long hours, diverting from their normal job roles. And I think every single one of them are heroes and deserve the recognition as such as well. So thank you very much for that. Scottish National Party are putting up, we've got 560 candidates in this election who are all local champions and local heroes, and are all really, really looking forward to the campaign. We pride ourselves on promoting community empowerment and local democracy, and I think it's a really, really important point to mention, of course, to make sure that you're looking at what your local parties are doing in your area, to have a look at their local manifestos. I know that certainly we as a party are really looking locally at what is important for our priorities, and that will be the case going forward as well. But we're really proud of the record that we are standing on. We are committed to investing in jobs and employability services, to continue with our ambitious house building programme, and particularly proud of our achievements and our future achievements in terms of childcare. And it's a really important point. And I'm particularly struck by the gender dynamic of the panel tonight as well. So I really do want to make this point around our workforce and our local government workforce. But councils are, in most areas, the biggest employers in their areas, and having a really ambitious policy on childcare is incredibly important. So we're really proud of that record, and we're really proud that we'll be expanding that down to 2- and 1-year-olds as well. Incredibly important to make sure that people can access work. And I think the one point that I do want to just kind of add, and I'm struck that nobody else has mentioned it, is just in terms of the kind of funding settlement that we are looking at the moment, particularly when we see a Westminster government, and it really is like a tale of two governments at the moment, where we've got Westminster, taking away the hard-working families with one hand, and the Scottish government trying incredibly hard to mitigate the impacts of that, and then also go above and beyond what they can do. So it's a really challenging time. And of course, we know that those challenges are likely to become even worse as we look at the rises in energy costs and the national insurance hikes coming our way as well. So local councils are really important in this conversation. I know certainly in our local area, our SNP group, as part of our budget process, invested extra money in the Scottish Welfare Fund to make sure that people locally in need that are affected by Tory austerity and some of the appalling policies that are coming down the line have, you know, a certain level of protection there. But we really do need to widen this conversation about funding to kind of look at the UK government aspect and how the Scottish Government are spending £600 million, you know, to mitigate the UK government's policies. And I think that's a real shame, because I think what we'll hear a lot of tonight is that there are other priorities in Scotland that we would much rather be spending that money on. I guess the last thing I just want to kind of impress on everybody, regardless of how you vote, who you're going to vote for in this election, do register to vote. It's so incredibly important that you use your voice. And what we often see in local government elections is the turnout isn't as big as it is in a Holyrood or Westminster election. So please, if you do one thing tonight, go away, register to vote, register for a postal vote as well. You've still got time to do that, and just make sure that you go out and use your voice. But good luck to everybody that's running in local government elections. I'm certainly excited to knock as many doors as possible in my own local area, and I would certainly encourage you to reach out to your local candidates and certainly to vote SNP in this election. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parry. Joining me tonight on the panel are two of my colleagues, Joanna Baxter, the Head of Local Government for UNISON, and Lorraine Thompson, the Vice Chair for UNISON Scotland, and also our Chair of the Education Issues Group. So the first question I have is actually from Joanna Baxter, the Head of Local Government, on pay. Joanna, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of our panellists. We really appreciate you joining our event this evening. So, as you have all said, the work that our members do across Scotland is vitally important, and it's nice to hear you all see that you recognise that. I guess our question really is about when our members might expect that recognition to translate into a better pay deal. And we say that because clearly last year's pay negotiations lasted almost a year, which was unacceptable. And we only narrowly avoided industrial action across Scotland by workers who were frustrated not only with the process, but also what was being proposed, and frustrated also with COSLA and the Scottish Government blaming each other for the lack of funding available to improve the pay offer. This year, our pay claim was submitted to COSLA on the 17th of January, and the pay implementation date is supposed to be tomorrow, the 1st of April. And to date, we have had one offer from COSLA of 2%. Inflation is currently sitting at 8.2%. Energy bills are increasing. Food and transport costs are increasing. So do you really believe that a 2% pay offer, which would equate to more than £800 for the 12% of local government workers earning above £40,000, but would only translate to £500 for the 51% of local government workers that earn below £25,000, that's the vast majority? Do you really think that is an offer that it recognises, rewards and respects the work of our local government members? And if you don't, what are you going to do about it?
Thank you, Joanna. I'll ask the representatives in the order that they spoke the first time round. So I call, first of all, Councillor Chaz Booth to respond for the Green Party.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks very much, Joanna, for the question. And you're absolutely right that 2% in the context of inflation hitting on 8% is a real terms cut. Is that acceptable? No, it's not, from my perspective. So what would the Greens do about it? Well, our manifesto hasn't launched yet, but I can give you a sneak preview that we want to see for social care workers a minimum wage of £15 an hour. But we want to go beyond that. We want to make sure that all local government workers are respected and that their pay and conditions reflect the enormous amount of work that they've put in and that they continue to put in to ensure that local services are delivered. So we've used our influence within the Scottish Government in terms of the cooperation agreement. Local government funding is going up in this current financial year, 22 to 23, by just over £1 billion. Now, obviously, there is a debate about how much of that is ring fenced and how much of that is core funding. From a Green perspective, we think that it's not right that we tie local government into lots of individual ring fenced funds. We want to see the core settlement increase as well, and we are trying to use our influence within the government as part of the cooperation agreement to try and achieve that. But to answer your question, is 2% adequate? No, it absolutely is not.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. I now call upon Councillor Neil Benny.
Yeah, is 2% enough? Is the fundamental premise of your question. It wouldn't seem like it. There are significant numbers of vacancies in the local government sector which have never been filled. Certainly in Stirling Council, we have a lot of vacancies sitting, and it's very difficult to fill them. When you look at social care, there are huge numbers of vacancies in social care. There's also an issue there with the commission services, which really needs to be addressed. There needs to be a good look at that. The thing here is that in terms of where local government finance is as a whole, there needs to be a very different way of looking at that. And this is why the Conservatives have the idea that we actually should have a proportionate share of the overall funding that's available made secure for local government, so that we always have this fundamental basis to build longer term budgets and longer term planning. That would aid with this, because one of the things that I've always been most frustrated about is it gets to budget time. You ask your chief finance officer, where are we on the projections for what the pay settlement's going to be? And then, after a 2.5 hour conversation, you end up kind of getting to the point of view where we don't know is really the answer. And this is the difficulty with the way that the bargaining is happening at the moment. It has to happen quicker. It has to be much more effective, and it has to be much more efficient, because local government workers need that surety. And frankly, so do councils. Councillors can't make the decisions over budgets without knowing what's going to be happening with in terms of salaries. I've been much more in favour of having that longer term view of what local government finance is going to look like, and actually securing better local government finance. Because while we're hearing that, there's been all these massive increases to local government finance, but we all know that comes with more strings attached to it than you can imagine. We have to have the flexibility to be able to pay our workforce a commensurate amount for what they've been doing for us. That reward needs to come from that more money being given to local government.
Thank you, Councillor Benny. I now call upon Councillor David Ross from the Labour Party.
No, I mean it's not satisfactory, the level of offer that we're able to make at the moment. But this is just another symptom of the crisis of funding in local government as a whole. The councils are faced with the choice of making pay increases, but the cost of that will be to cut services and to cut jobs. And the councils are stuck in the middle of this. As I said before, Scottish Government controls well over 80% of the fund. So we are dependent. If we don't get the funding from Scottish Government, it's very, very difficult to pay decent pay increases. And I'm certainly an advocate of we actually need to look at the real terms loss of earnings over a period of years and start actually making that up, so that our workforce is paid at a decent level, because you have to be paid what the job is worth. If you can't pay sufficient to attract the staff, then the services are going to suffer. It's the staff that determine the quality of the services that we all want to see. But it's a case of arguing and working together, I think, to change this position of the funding of local government. I think there are serious discussions to be had within COSLA about the level of the offer and where we go forward here. But it won't be determined by the next local government election. It's a failure of the Scottish Government and the Greens as part of that to actually provide sufficient funding this year. There was no money to cover inflation. There was no money to cover pay increases. There was no money to cover demographic growth. And if we don't get that, then the stark choice is between, paying workers more that they deserve, or cutting jobs and services. And that's the dilemma we're in.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ross. I'll now call on Willie Rennie from the Liberal Democrat Party.
You can hear the frustration in David's voice. I mean, David is on the front line. He's a co-leader in Fife. He's the leader of the Labour group in COSLA, and you can sense the frustration. He clearly wants to pay workers more, but his hands are tied. And that's the frustrating thing about this whole debate. You'll have everybody on this panel saying that 2% is not enough and it needs to be much higher. But this is a matter of political choices. And fundamentally, because the SNP and the Greens have tied the hands of local government so much, it's their choice. It's their choice not to go above the miserly offer that's currently on the table. It needs to change, and we can't keep on pretending that somehow there's going to be magic up money from a place that it doesn't exist. Local government doesn't have the freedom to raise its own money. It is primarily dependent upon central government for its funds. Of course, it can raise a small amount of tax and charges locally, but it's central government in the form of the SNP and the Greens that will make the difference. And as I said at the beginning, the funds have effectively been cut for years upon end. And the consequences for this will be stark because, workers with the job market as it is, some workers will just walk and will find it difficult to get the jobs done that are essential to get done in every community, and vulnerable people will suffer. So it's short-sighted, this approach to it. We must stop the game playing on this and actually fund local government properly. If that's what the SNP and Greens want to do, that's what they should do, rather than pretending somehow somebody else is going to come up with the money that doesn't exist. So I can understand David's frustration, and I can understand actually SNP leaders on other groups who've got equal frustrations in this regard as well. What we need is the SNP and the Greens to stump up with the money to pay a proper pay increase, or we're going to feel the consequences right across our communities in the lack of delivery of services.
Thank you very much, Willie Rennie. Can I ask now Councillor Kelly Parry from the Scottish Nationalist Party? Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. I guess the first thing I would say is, Scottish National Party don't have a majority at COSLA in terms of the way that decision making is taken. So I would argue that having as many councils as possible who are led by SNP administrations is certainly my advice. Scottish National Party has got a really good record in terms of public sector pay, and we certainly delivered a pay increase of more than 3% to the lowest earners in terms of public sector pay, and I think that shows our commitment in terms of how we would approach that. And David, as one of those leaders, so I think I'll back to you, David. But I was really struck by what you were saying there, Willie, around the way that councils are funded and where that money has to come from, because you could literally have replaced the words of the Scottish Government and the UK Government in terms of what you were saying there. Because we do need to have this wider conversation about austerity. We do need to have a wider conversation about how Scotland is funded, because we don't have a magic money tree in Scotland, and we really need to start having that conversation. And I think the last point that I would make on this is around what the question was about in terms of is the 2% enough? And we have to make sure that we recognise that the cost of living is increasing, inflation is going up, and these are things that could be tackled or at least partly addressed by Westminster, and they're choosing not to do so. Instead, they're giving their pals contracts and tax cuts to those that really don't need it. Meanwhile, we're all, getting handed a loan for energy that we need to pay back, and a national insurance tax hike. So I think this is part of a wider conversation. But I think certainly best advice for me would be to make sure that we've got as many councils in Scotland that are SNP run, to make sure that we've got a strong voice at COSLA to argue all these points that are being very well made.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parry.
would it be possible to come back in? Would it be possible?
Yes, if you want. If someone wants to come back in,
Because I mean, there was a direct criticism of my remarks. I mean, Kelly was saying that she could equally have replaced the words UK government and Scottish government in what I was saying. It's just not true. The Scottish government, the Scottish Parliament, can raise the majority of the money that it spends now. It has more tax raising powers. Local government doesn't have the same flexibility, so they can't make the same choices. That's the difference. So it's just a false argument. And the last thing we should be having is more SNP councillors just going along with what the SNP government tells them to do. What we need is people who are going to stand up for local communities, and you won't get that with the SNP. I've been to numerous COSLA conferences where SNP council leaders don't stand up to their minister. They sit there silent. What we need is people who are going to stand up for the communities to make a difference. You won't get that with the SNP, and increasingly you won't get that with the Greens either. So it's a false comparison between local, central, Scottish and UK. It just is not a comparison. The flexibility is not there with councils.
Could I come in very briefly, Mark?
Thank you. I'm just going to invite other panel members in the interest of fairness. Councillor Booth, do you want to come in?
Thanks very much, Mark. So Willie specifically criticised the Greens there. And actually, I would agree with one thing that he said there, which is that local government doesn't have the powers to raise its own money. That's absolutely true. But Greens are trying to act on that. So we have, in the last session of Parliament, we have given councils the powers to introduce a workplace parking levy, which Lib Dem councillors are now opposing. So which is it, Willie? Do you want to give local authorities more powers, or are you opposing them using those powers? And as Greens, we're also fundamentally committed to getting rid of the outdated and unfair council tax. And as part of our cooperation agreement with the Scottish Government, we have made that a condition, that we now have a process for coming up with an alternative to the council tax. But we want to go beyond that. We want to genuinely empower local authorities to ensure that they can raise their own funding and that they're responsible for it. Meanwhile, we have the Lib Dems sitting on the sidelines carping. I mean, we are prepared to roll up our sleeves and get involved. The Lib Dems just criticise.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Does any other panel member want to come in on this part? Councillor Ross?
Yeah, I just want to come back on some of the things Kelly's doing. She's trying to give the impression there that if only the SNP had a majority in COSLA, everything would be rosy. I mean, the reality is it's...
David, you're muted.
Sorry, just as well, just as well. Probably, I'll moderate myself. But I just want to challenge, what Kelly is trying to put across is, if there were more SNP councillors on COSLA, then things would be rosy, and that isn't the case, because it's been the Labour group, quite honestly, that has been pushing to stand up and ask for more money, and we were partially successful as COSLA in getting £120 million from a direct meeting we had to have with Nicola Sturgeon on that, and got that. That still leaves a black hole of 251 million. But just to come back as well, we've been told the council tax would end, at least 5 years ago, before the last elections. We've been told there would be a fair funding framework before the last elections. It hasn't materialised. The promises have been broken, and until we get that fair fiscal framework for local government, and I've been an advocate of, we should have a certain proportion of what Scotland gets guaranteed to local government. But the other thing as well, the Scottish Government is now asking for COSLA's support in terms of a fiscal framework for Scotland with the UK government, which we are willing to support, but on the condition that actually what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as it were, and what the local government should have a similar fair fiscal framework as well. So the Scottish Government needs to look at its own, what it is asking for, and actually deliver that to local government as well.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Councillor Benny, did you want to come in?
Yeah. If I can, Chair, I think the sort of with tedious regularity, SNP representatives will always sort of start blaming Westminster or blaming other people for the problems that they've created. We have the largest the largest block-funded grant coming to the Scottish Government since devolution started, and yet we still see cuts to local government services. These are choices that are made. And the point David Ross just made there was the point I was going to make. This idea that we really do need a Barnett formula for local government. We need a formula for local government to make sure that it has its share of the funding which is given and raised by the Scottish Government. We need to make sure that we get our fair share of that, because the point that Councillor Booth made in terms of local government raising more of its own finance, that in principle I would completely agree with that. The impracticality comes from that in terms of the way that things are funded now, is that 80% of our funds comes from central government or from Scottish Government. The changing away from that would require quite a wide array of tax raising powers, which would require local government to act in a very different way. Now, I'd be open for that conversation. I hope we can have that conversation. But that is, I think we're quite a way away from that. I think the first step would be to get that fair fiscal framework, that Barnett formula for local government, so that we know what's coming and that we can't be bypassed from Scottish Government choices.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parry, would you like to respond to that? Because there's 2 chances.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realise that when I made a point that I was going to have every single panel member mansplain to me how that was incorrect. But no, I'm really looking forward to hearing more questions. So I'm sure we've laboured that point enough, and I'd much rather hear from your members.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a colleague has put on online in the chat just to remind us that public sector pay has fallen behind, and in local government that's around 16%. So it's a big issue for our members. I'm going to bring Joanna back in to respond, and then I've got some more questions. I've got a few questions now coming in. Thanks.
Yeah, I won't take up much time, Mark. Just to say to the panel members, UNISON's view is that the current offer from COSLA is completely unacceptable and is an insult to the hard work that our members have been doing, not only for the past 2 years, but for the past decade. And quite frankly, there needs to be a significant improvement if we are to avert mass industrial unrest in Scotland. Our local government conference meets tomorrow, and our committee will be making recommendations to them about how we take forward this issue, given that tomorrow is the pay implementation date and there is not an acceptable offer on their way from COSLA. And just to say that the last 2 years working in the pandemic have had a significant impact on our members. We did a survey last year of the impact of COVID. Over 12,000 members responded to that survey, and a third of them reported that they'd had to seek medical intervention for their mental health as a result of the increased workloads and stress caused by the pandemic. So it's not enough just to argue about whose fault it is. There needs to be an improved offer, and UNISON will be taking decisions about how we take this forward if one is not forthcoming.
Thank you, Joanna. I just want to, before I bring in Lorraine as Chair of the Education School, I just want to say that UNISON is very proud of being the largest women's organisation in Europe. And a lot of our workers work in a lot of the most demanding jobs, a lot of our own workers, in particular education and social care. Lorraine represents those education workers. So I'm going to invite Lorraine in to ask a question, and then I've got some questions that people put in, members have put in the chat, and I'll come on to them. Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel. So while COVID has undoubtedly affected staffing levels and continues to do so, there is more to COVID-related staffing issues than the illness itself. Our UNISON education members are clear that the isolation our children and young people have experienced over the last couple of years has significantly impacted their development and potentially parent is poorer due to the struggle and multifaceted stress that parents are now under. Nonetheless, to say the cost of living will have a significant impact going forward. All of this then comes together in our early years in education settings where socialisation and personal development of the children and young people is at a lower level. This in 1,000 different ways now requires more one-to-one or higher support ratios for a greater number of children, and therefore the current staffing ratios are simply not high enough, even if all staff are present. Do you accept this need for more early years and education support staff, and how would you address this need both locally and across the country?
Thank you, Lorraine. And I'm going to start with Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think it's a really excellent question, and one that I can relate to myself, trying to work through the pandemic with 2 kids, including a wee one, a toddler. Incredibly difficult, and I know that many people had it worse as well. And I'm really struck by the kind of impacts to the workforce, not just in terms of the physical impacts and operational impacts, but many of local government workforce work in areas where they're experiencing trauma in their day-to-day work as well. And they really powered through that and made sure that the most vulnerable people were supported, and probably absolutely saved lives as well. So I think that's a really important part to acknowledge, but also the trauma that comes with that as well. In terms of what we need to do in terms of supporting our wee ones, and I completely feel this, kind of watching my own wee one who spent more of her life in lockdown than not at the point that we came out, the impact that has had on our young people. And it was absolutely the right steps that we took at the time in terms of what we're going through a pandemic. But it absolutely has had an impact and will continue to have an impact both on the workforce and the wee ones as well. So I know that I reiterated at the start the Scottish National Party's commitment to expanding childcare as quickly as we can to those that need it as quickly as we can. And that's something that we're already working through on kind of both spheres of government and making sure that we can do that as quickly as we can. But even simple policy changes that we've been able to do around deferring childcare places into primary school to make sure that we ones have got that wee bit extra support is really important as well. So really good point. And I think we've got a strong record to build on, but of course we want to make sure that nobody's left behind and make sure that we take the workforce with us as well. So we're going to continue investing in the workforce for early years, work with local councils to make sure that we can do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible to make sure that we give the best start that we can to all our wee ones in Scotland, and to make sure that we look after the workforce as well.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. I'd like to invite Willie Rennie from the Liberal Democrats.
Thanks very much, Mark. This is something that when I was leader of the Lib Dems, I would prioritise. There's a number of different factors to this. One is the life chances of young people, and that's why nursery education, I think, is one of the best investments. The second is to do with what was the pupil premium in England that we were responsible for introducing, is now the Pupil Equity Fund in Scotland. We need to make sure that works much more effectively, that the fund's made permanent so that we can employ permanent teachers and support staff, because the challenges now in schools are significant. We know the poverty-related attainment gap is huge, but we've also had significant increases in the number of young people with additional support needs. Meanwhile, the specialist support for them has reduced over the years. Now, there's been a change in the way that we run that service, but equally so, teachers have not been given the support from workers in the classroom, but also from specialists to be able to address that. And then the final thing is around about temporary workers. There's far too many people in the education sector and in the nursery education sector who are on short-term temporary contracts. And we need to make that a much more professionalised, permanent arrangement so that they can have proper careers, they've got a career path, they can earn the money that they deserve to earn and they should be earning. And that's why we are against the kind of casualisation of the workforce that's increased in recent years, in part because of the funding's been temporary. So those are the kind of things that we would change, in addition to providing more mental health support for the workers that I outlined earlier on, mental health first aiders in every workplace, but also the proper professional support within the health service so that people can get the services that they need when they're burnt out as they currently are. So those are the kind of things that I think we should be addressing to close the poverty-related attainment gap, to support the workers that are providing this service in terms of mental health, but also in terms of terms and conditions.
Thank you very much, Willie Rennie. Can I now invite Councillor David Ross from the Labour Party?
Thanks. Yeah, just a number of points on this. I mean, I think we all need to recognise that, I mean, our young people have been hugely impacted by isolation and other things as a result of the pandemic, as have our staff. And there does need to be measures put in place to support and catch up on that. I think the second thing to say, and we need to keep arguing this, that classroom assistants and other support staff in schools are just as valuable as teaching staff, and that tends to get lost at some places, partly because I think the Scottish Government are involved in the negotiations on teachers' pay, but not in the rest of it. I think the third thing I'd say is that, again, it goes back to the funding crisis, and in our own authority, my own authority, we were investing in early years way before it became the thing for the Scottish Government. And actually, we have lost the funding. It's been transferred into PEF funding, the Pupil Equity Fund, dished out to individual schools, and that has become much of a lottery. Whereas we used to have a good track record of actually we were closing the attainment gap, we were raising the bar and narrowing the gap, and that has now plateaued. And that's because I think they have taken and top sliced the money that we were using to do that, and dished it out to individual schools, where some are very effective, others I think you have to question. So I think it is a real issue. We have to take seriously the impacts that the pandemic has had. We need to value our classroom support assistants and other support staff equally to teaching staff. And we need to trust local authorities to know where best to put the money to make the impacts in their local areas, rather than deciding it from Holyrood.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. I'd like to invite Councillor Neil Benny to answer the question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is a real tough one, because actually there's almost the proportion of someone's life that they've spent in this COVID lockdown, and the restrictions that we put in to protect the country from COVID. That is the proportion at which they've been affected, and for some people that is 100% of their lives have been spent in this lockdown. When I was speaking to a young lad he's 19, he's just about to start university, and he's never really been in a social environment, certainly not in a pub, but in a kind of significant way, because he turned 18 during the pandemic and wasn't able to socialize in that way, and that's a really challenging thing. It's a horrible thing to think of. When you kind of put that down to the early years, when children are in that very initial stage of development, you start seeing that it is about making sure that our early years provision is up to scratch, is well staffed. But then there are certain specialisms which we're probably going to have to fund much more significantly. Mental health's already been spoken about. That is going to be a significant issue here. But also things like speech and language therapy, things like this, where children haven't been exposed to the wide range of experiences that they would normally have been exposed to in those situations. Now, there's always been children have had those additional needs throughout the education system, but there are going to be significantly more children and young people who are going to have those kind of issues going through. One of my candidates has just had a year ago, just had a wee baby. His wife did, and they've really struggled because of the pandemic, and it's been really hard for them to be able to do that initial socialization that you do with children under the age of 5, under the age of 2, in fact. And it is hard. I think that the answer here is around about making sure that services are designed around individuals, are designed around individual families, designed around individual children. And I think that making sure that we've got enough people with the specialisms that we require, and that those people are engaged and well trained to be able to undertake the work that's going to be needed to be undertaken here is a really important aspect of this, which is going to need money, as Dave has already said, but it's also going to need local government to reshape the services around that. And I think that's going to be a big piece of work over the next few years.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I've got, and I'd like to call now Councillor Chasbooth.
Thanks very much indeed. And thanks, Lorraine, for the question. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely crucial that we do support staff in the education sector, not just teachers, but PSAs and everybody involved in the care and well-being of our young people. So I would say there are a couple of things. One is keep class sizes down, and Greens have pushed for more investment in teachers to ensure that we achieve that. We want to see an improvement to the progression, the training and the conditions for PSAs, people support assistants. And in terms of tackling the poverty-related attainment gap, I think that is absolutely crucial. And the best way of doing that is by ending poverty. Now, Green influence within the Scottish Government has already seen a doubling of child support payment from £10 to £20, and last week we saw the increase again to £25. Now, that's not enough. It's still not enough, especially in the face of Tory austerity and cuts coming from Westminster. But it's a significant step in the right direction, and it shows that Greens are really absolutely crucial for us is ending poverty, because poverty can impact on so many other aspects of your life. It's absolutely unfair for those who suffer from it. So we want to see a Scotland without poverty, and we're taking significant steps towards that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Booth. This year, UNISON celebrates the Year of the Disabled Worker, and I've had a question put into the chat from one of our colleagues about the fact that local government needs more powers in order to support disabled people at local level, and not leaving it to the private sector to exploit disabled people through profits. So the question fundamentally is, how will your party help make this happen for disabled people to be better supported in our communities? And I'm going to start with Councillor Booth.
You caught me on the hop there, Mark. I thought you were going to go to one of the other panel members. I think thanks very much indeed for the question. I think it's absolutely right that we, I've already said that Greens believe that improving diversity in our town halls is important. Some of the Green candidates identify as disabled. In my last 5 years, I've worked very closely with Councillor Derek Howie, who's blind, registered blind, and the challenges that he has come across as an elected councillor on Edinburgh City Council are very substantial. So there's an awful lot that the council can do, both as an employer to ensure that we are improving the diversity of our employment, also through procurement to ensure that all of the contractors and suppliers that we work with are valuing diversity, but actually even within the functions that the local authority carries out. So, for example, I was working with Councillor Howie on ensuring that we have more accessible buildings. We are a planning authority. We can set standards that say we don't think it's acceptable for builders to be building inaccessible buildings. And that's something that I've been pushing forward with him. So there's an awful lot that we can do, but I think absolutely crucial is that we listen to the voices of disabled people and organisations representing disabled people. And Greens have been pushing really hard that those voices are heard within Edinburgh Council, and we are keen that that happens throughout Scotland.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Can I call Willie Rennie from the Liberal Democrats?
I would really like to know from Tony, I think it's come from Tony, what particular exploitation he's talking about from the private sector, because it would help us, I think, answer the question a little bit more. But if I can make a stab at what I think the issues are here, we need to have adequate services of support. Many have been shut down through the pandemic, and we need to find a way of getting those services up and running quickly. We need to make sure there's proper support as well and advice for disabled people, and then greater efforts for those who want to and are able to work, access into workplaces. And there is some quite good work being done within government and outside to try and make it possible for disabled people to work, so they're not excluded from the workplace. Those are kind of some of the things that I think we should be doing more on, in addition to making sure the buildings are accessible and that the financial support is available as well. So those are the kind of things. But I don't know if Tony's able to maybe contribute again, so we can get a better idea about the exploitation, because I'd be particularly keen to try and address that exploitation specifically if we can.
We'll certainly seek Tony to do that, Willie. Can I call Councillor Parry?
Thanks, and it's a really good question, and it's a kind of piece of work that I've certainly worked on over the last few years between Scottish Government and local government, around making sure that local government is at the forefront of our employability services. So we published the Disabled People Employment Action Plan in December 2018, and we're really expanding on that with record levels of employability funding this year to support disabled people who can and do want to work to do that, and to make sure that there's fair and flexible work practices there to do that as well. And we're also making sure that we keep an eye on, the disability employment gap, the gender pay gap, and race equality, and all the employment practices that we do. But very much like Chaz, I guess the kind of last point to make on this, and I think it's an important one to make, is that we have certainly had a real emphasis on recruiting people who have a disability to be a councillor for the SNP. And we know that when we have those voices around the table with lived experience, and not only that, but actually making the decisions that affect people with disability and affect their access to employment and the standard of life that they have, that those decisions are better made by having those voices in the room. So I guess that's just another reason to vote for the SNP at this election. But it's an incredibly important point to make, and certainly one that we are very committed to.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Councillor Benny.
Thank you, Mark. This is a tremendously important thing for local government to be involved in. The issues about people who have any kind of disability, making sure that they're well supported in our communities is absolutely essential work for local government. One of the things that certainly I've been involved in quite heavily in the last couple of years has been around about that issue about design, more about the design of sort of public-facing spaces, whether it be in the council's public spaces or indeed in the private sector around Stirling as well, around about the issue of people who suffer from hearing loss, because there's a lot of design issues around about that, which could very small matters, very small actions can actually make a huge amount of difference. One of the other interesting things that I've found around about this area is that there's a lot of hidden disabilities which people are a little bit reticent about talking about. And I think that can be quite a useful thing to do when you're talking about how we develop a good, positive and diverse workforce in the local authorities. The employability issue has come up there, and I think that is also an incredibly important part and quite an under-analysed part of what local government does. It's hugely important, the way that certainly in Stirling, our council sort of pairs people up and makes sure that they've got the training and the aptitude and the work that's done by the Disability Confidence Scheme to make sure that employers both in the public sector and indeed in the private sector, are able to and encouraged to employ people with as wide a range of disabilities as they can, because the point's been made about lived experience and elected councillors. I've worked alongside councillors, and we have candidates who have various disabilities, it is interesting to hear their point of view, and their lived experience can really really contribute to the debate. I think that is an important aspect of it, is making sure that people with disabilities have their voices heard, because anybody wants to have their voice heard. Everybody wants to have their lived experience recognised and their lives improved by their local authority. And having people on local authorities and in councils who represent that, who have lived that, is a really important thing. And it's something the Conservatives are very passionate about, making sure we encourage people who have disabilities to stand for election at all levels.
Thank you, Councillor Benny. Councillor, lost my place at Booth. Councillor Booth, do you want to come in?
It's me, isn't it?
I think I've already been on this question.
Yeah,
I think I was first off.
Thank you, Ian. Track here.
My turn, Mark.
Yeah, your turn, Councillor.
Thank you. But having come last, probably a lot of it's already been said. But just to reiterate, I mean, I think one of the roles of the local authority is to support anybody in our local area who needs a bit support to do things. And I think as an employer, obviously we should be demonstrating good practice and ensuring we live up to the things we aspire to. But also, I think we can demonstrate that good practice as to other employers in the local area, and actually go out and advocate on that. I think there's certainly a degree of an enforcement role I would like to see for local government at a local level, of where employers are not, standing up to that. And as I think Chaz said about the procurement route as well, and that's where I think we probably do need more powers, and not just in terms of disability or things, but also poor work practice and employment practices of if employers aren't adhering to those, then local government should have the right not to employ them as in their supply chain. And obviously, I mean, I think there is a role in terms of support for skills and training to allow people to get into jobs that maybe otherwise would be difficult for them. And I think again there is a role for supported employment schemes, and I've seen certainly some of the success of some of those to level the playing field a bit. But I think other than that, I mean, I think a lot of it has been said by the other participants.
Thank you, Councillor Ross, and apologies for that there. I just lost my place. Try to look at the next question. UNISON, Scottish Local Government Committee and COSLA issued a statement around the National Care Service because we have some concerns around the future of local government and the impact that any proposals may have. But what we are absolutely, as a trade union in the public services, we are committed to, and we welcome, is a focus on social care and the fact that they have been neglected in terms of terms and conditions, employment. It's been a lot, it's predominantly women, part-time workers working on very unsocial hours and in very poor conditions. We pride ourselves in working alongside our colleagues in health and in social care. And we don't see in UNISON that there should be any future in the delivery of care services for the elderly using the market. We believe that it should be publicly owned and publicly controlled and publicly delivered. But we've got a question from a colleague on social care, which I think is probably a very important question that we've had tonight, one of the most important for a very large part of our workforce. When are local council and private care staff going to be rewarded with a decent pay award and take their well-being seriously? Also make this career more attractive to retain staff and more pathways to further careers in this field. Staff shortages are horrendous at the moment, morale is low and staff are suffering from the burnout. And I'm going to start with Councillor Parry.
Thanks, yeah. It's a really good question, and there will be no councillors on this call, that isn't aware of how acute those shortages are at the moment. It is something that's affecting us all, and some of that is about COVID and about how we recover from that, about some of the workforce trauma elements of that. It must have just been an absolutely incredibly difficult time to work through. So I completely understand why that is. I think there's another couple of factors as well. I know we've not mentioned it tonight, and it seems like it's so long ago, but Brexit is still an issue in terms of the workforce and attracting workers here as well. And I think some of the other kind of hostile policies that we're seeing around immigration at Westminster at the moment just isn't helpful in terms of that at all. Scotland, wants to welcome workers from other countries to help solve some of those issues, and that's a real problem for us at the moment because we just don't have the powers to do that. So that would certainly be helpful. And I think, and certainly it was picked up on there, just the introduction of the comment as well, as whilst councils and local authorities and the Feely report was looking at this around how can we make the care service better for people and better for employees. Meanwhile, we've got private care home firms that are, paying out dividends to their shareholders, and that just is not a sustainable situation at all. And that's why all parties, except as Willie noted himself, not picking on you again, Willie, but you did mention it yourself, aren't supporting the proposals for the National Care Service. So I certainly do appreciate that there's a lot of detail to be worked out in terms of the National Care Service and the implications for local government and the implications for staff workforce, but I do think that it's the right thing to do for the real impacts that are happening right now, that's mentioned in Gail's question there as well. So I really hope that we see that progressing quite soon, but I think that there's other factors as well that we could be doing with fixing around that.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Councillor Booth.
Thanks very much indeed for the question. And yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything that Councillor Parry has just said there. I think it's absolutely crucial that we pay social care staff enough, and we have a commitment in our manifesto to pay a minimum of £15 an hour. But I think pay is not the only thing. It's also, as the question quite rightly pointed out, it's about support, it's about career progression, it's about training, and it's about ensuring that we make caring a career that people really want to go into and stay into, and that they feel valued. Because I think at the moment, far too many workers in the care sector do not feel sufficiently valued, and we absolutely have to change that. Can I just say on the National Care Service? So I'm in a slightly difficult position here. I'm obviously here representing our party, but the National Care Service was one of the concerns that I had on the cooperation agreement that the Greens had with the SNP government. And I know that many of my councillor colleagues shared that concern. Our own Green manifesto had a commitment to ensure that the National Care Service was locally accountable and was decentralised. And I have a concern that the care service going forward may not achieve that. Now, I've worked really hard with actually our new ministers and with others to ensure that we try and use our influence within the Scottish Government to ensure that, in particular, trade unions are involved in the conversation about what this new National Care Service will do. It will be a failure. The National Care Service will be a failure if we're simply replacing a fragmented private sector care provision with a national privatised care provision. That will not be success. And that's why Greens want to ensure that wherever possible, we bring care services back in-house, that they're delivered by the public sector, because we fundamentally believe that public sector provision is the best type of provision there is.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Willie Rennie.
Yeah, I'm glad that Chaz has said that, because I think there are many people that have got real concerns about what this National Care Service will turn out to be, because it's been equated with the formation of the National Health Service, but it's nothing of the sort, because it won't be free at the point of delivery, which is at the core of the the National Health Service. It's not been nationalised, it's been centralised. It's moving control from local government to central government. And although there's grand aspirations for improving pay, there's no concrete proposals to increase the pay to the level that's required. And when I represent North East Fife, I have people every day who come to me and tell me they're not getting care packages, they're stuck in hospital, they've not had the end of life care for their families, and they've died before they've got that care being available. So this is having a real consequence right now because there's a shortage of care workers, and it's in part because people were exhausted through the pandemic. But the truth is, we've not been investing for years in the social care staff pay, and that needs to change, and we need to be honest about it. And I think the creation of the National Care Service is a distraction. Of course, I want to improve standards. I want to have national standards that everybody complies with, but you don't have to change the accountability structures in order to achieve that. And that's why, Kelly's right. She's not picking on me. It takes a lot to shut me up, Kelly. So don't worry about that. The important thing is here that we recognise where the problem is, and the problem is we're not paying people enough. If we don't pay people enough, we won't have a good enough standard of service, and people will lose out. And that's what's got to change, and it needs to change quickly if we're not going to have a care service in real crisis for many, many, many years to come.
Thank you, Willie Rennie. Councillor David Ross.
Yeah, I mean, the issue about pay levels is just one of the aspects, I think, of what is a real crisis in social care. And again, my party has got an aspiration to move to a £15 an hour pay for carers. But again, the fundamental problem is it's been underfunded for years. There has been a complete failure of workforce planning and a skills gap, so that the people aren't out there. Even when at the end of the pandemic or during the pandemic, Scottish Government started throwing money at it, there weren't the care workers to actually employ because of that long-term failure of workforce planning. And the Feely report has identified the underfunding of at least 600 million. We put it at probably nearer £1 billion. And in terms of a national care service, my party is in favour. I mean, I think it was our idea in the first place, but it was a very different national care service than what is being proposed now, which is a wholesale centralisation and takeover and reduction of local accountability in care. A national care service could certainly have a role in terms of setting national terms and conditions, setting standards, training and support, and a much more professionalisation of the profession. But it certainly shouldn't be involved in operational delivery, and it shouldn't be run by unaccountable appointees. Unfortunately, like local health services are at the moment, the NHS, which leaves a lot to be desired, and part of the IGBs, which is a problem, and you lose the democratic accountability at a local level, the pressure that can be put on when things are going wrong. Our independent sector did a survey of their members recently and identified that probably 50% of the providers are not paying proper money for travel, and probably about 20 to 30% are actually using 0 hours contracts, and that is just unacceptable. So there is a huge argument and fight to be had here, and again, I think we need to be standing up to the current proposals, which are again a wholesale takeover. And the other aspect, and I think Willie touched on the delayed discharge and people waiting in hospital, there is a real crisis. It's not just that. I mean, and government focus on delayed discharge and getting people out of hospitals, which quite rightly is a worry. But in my area, there are between 300 and 400 people stuck in the community in their homes without being able to get and access a care package because of the lack of funding and the lack of workers. So what we need to do is to put in the proper level of investment in the proper training, support, pay levels increases. The last thing we want is a huge disruptive structural change that is not actually going to achieve the outcomes that we want to see for care.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Councillor Benny.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. For many years, the solution to low pay, it seems, has been to bring in more people who are willing to work for less money. I don't think that's a good way of running anything. And I think in the social care sector, the problem of low pay is a significant issue. We are having huge problems recruiting social care staff in the Stirling area. When I think about this particular area of policy, I'm reminded of over many years, and your Vice Chairman Lorraine will remember the incident when the SNP tried to close a public council and care home in the Stirling area, and that was a huge local issue. We managed to reverse the decision, and one of the outcomes of that was a major look at what our future care needs were going to be. And it was interesting because even at that time we foresaw this problem with workforce in around about 2020 to 25, because there is an entire Western world, the United States included, there's actually a drop off in the number of people who are between 20 and 30 at the moment, and that's why there's such a significant issues in workforce planning at the moment. But the important thing here is not just pay. Pay is a major element of this, and I really do. There's something interesting about what's being suggested in terms of some of the the £15 an hour and stuff like this. I think these things are things that need to be looked at and figured out whether we can afford them, and if we can, then we should do them. But there's an esteem issue here, and there's a training issue here, because people who get into social care, and I've known quite a number of people in my private life who've worked in social care, and they want to help people. They want to be able to go in and help someone and do for them, and then make sure that they're okay. They don't want to be in for 2 minutes and then on to the next 2 minute appointment, and then on to the next 2 minute appointment, which is what's happening now because of this shortage. And I know we mostly did away with that, but because of the shortage, you were kind of going back to that. And it comes into this thing of, we need to address that issue. We need to get more people into the sector. We need to make the sector more attractive for people, both in pay terms, in esteem terms, and indeed in how good the job is, how rewarding the job is. But oftentimes politicians seem to get distracted by talking about governance and distracted by talking about how we're going to assemble services. We've gone through a long period now of talking about integration joint boards and who's going to sit on the integration joint boards and who's going to have the control and who's issuing instructions and all this kind of stuff. Now we're moving into a position where we're going to be having almost what feels like Groundhog Day, the same discussions about a national care service. Now, the Conservatives come at this from the point of view is that we want local care service. We want a local care service. We want local care. We want a local care guarantee where care is managed in the community, and where there are local workers able to service that care and to be able to go in and help and care for people. That's the Conservative Party position. And I think that what this national care service debate is happening without necessarily thinking fully about what it is that we're actually trying to achieve in terms of helping people in the local communities. Because when I speak to care staff in the Stirling area, they know their people, they know the people they're caring for, they know what services they can access in the local area, and they also know their communities, they know their neighbours, they know the people around them. And that is the great thing about local care. And we should never forget that that's why local care is the best kind of care.
Thank you very much, Councillor Benny. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our Hustings event. Time always runs away with us. But there were some questions I couldn't get to, but I think I would like to just say a few briefly about those areas for you to think about in the parties and leading up to the election, because these are questions we'll be putting to our members to ask you on the doorsteps and at the polling stations. UNISON, as we've also in local government, we have our pledge card, remember, so encourage all your candidates across Scotland to go into UNISON branches and make contact with them and sign that pledge around respect, recognise and reward. I also just want to say Willie, that Tony Slavin has put into the chat a bit more detail around the question of disabled. So if the candidates are able to access that, if you could go in and maybe just respond to that in the chat, that would be useful, because that'll be held on our system for some time. I mean, some of the other questions were very important around the climate change. So our colleagues made the point that it's all in your manifestos, but councils are doing very different things. And until we're all doing the same thing, you know, what progress are we actually making? So I think that's one of the points I think I'd ask you to take away with you. Another colleague's made a very important point around people who've been home working during the pandemic and who may be asked to homework going into the future. And local government, mostly everywhere, they haven't been compensated in any way for that. So they're delivering council services from their homes, whilst local authorities have been saving money by not opening offices, etc. And I think that it's important that if workers are carrying out those services at home, that they should be, you know, they should be compensated for the costs associated with that, because that is eaten into their wage packets. And I think two final points. My colleagues made comments around the £500 COVID reward. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear. I believe in public services, and I absolutely agree that those workers who got that reward, I don't think it was high enough, but they were entitled to receive that reward. But I also feel that local government workers who were there throughout the pandemic, every single day, doing things that we were unprecedented things, like setting up temporary mortuaries that we would never have expected, our registration staff who have had to deal with unprecedented amounts of family who couldn't be with their loved ones, having to cope with all of those pressures. And, you know, the workers who come in are key workers who allowed other public sector workers to continue to provide services in our community, in our retail areas. That we do believe that £500 COVID reward should have been rolled out in local government for our members, because we believe that they responded. Our waste workers who were out picking up contaminated waste at times when nobody knew at the very outset what was going on and what the impact that might be. So these are all important things that I would ask you to consider in the local elections coming up. And just one final point, a colleague made a comment there about the council tax. It was related to something that Councillor Booth had said, and that's, you know, to have a real, I mean, the council tax does need to be considered. We should be having that debate and that discussion. And if it is going to replace, what's it going to be replaced with? And a couple of years ago, UNISON commissioned a report with the Jimmy Reid Foundation that sets out our position in relation to replacement for council tax. And I would ask that we can certainly send that to the parties, but you give consideration to the proposals we've got in it. But we are open to dialogue about the future funding of local government. And just finally, I want to say about the ring fence funding that comes to local government. We do believe in UNISON that we have fought against that ring fence, and that we believe that it does not do anything to come, you know, and it doesn't increase, or it certainly decreases community empowerment when centralised government is making decisions around funding, and also on the localism, because we are passionate in local government about local democratic accountability. Your elected members who are delivering that local democratic accountability, and I think that we should pride that, and we should make that a focus. And I think if you're standing in these local elections, you should be passionate about councils delivering community services. So I want to say a huge thank you to all our panel members tonight. And I wish you all the very best for the elections. I hope that my colleagues put you under extreme pressure during the election campaign. I'll certainly be tomorrow. Local government workers across Scotland will be gathering for the first time in 2 years, and I'll be certainly encouraging them to ask and probing questions. And as I say, this will be available going forward. So thank you to you all. It's appreciated, and hopefully we can have a very positive election. And I also just say to my colleagues who are on the call tonight and who watch this that we have a pay campaign. So make sure you participate, get the 10-foot placards out to the candidates, get them to sign up. And hopefully we can make these council elections. And I think Councillor Parry made the point that they are, you know, we don't get as good a turnout, but let's make sure we do everything. Today I was contacted by some of our schools in Renfrewshire to say, will this be available to show the 16-year-old voters? Something that I'm very proud of when I go down south and I tell them about the 16-year-old voting in Scotland. And I think that that'll be positive if we can reach those young members and get them active in politics and in the trade unions. I think that that's a good step forward. So thank you to you all and good evening. And I wish you all the very best in the forthcoming elections.
Thanks very much, Mark. And thank you to UNISON for organising this.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.